The contract was already on the table when I walked in. I hadn't been invited to read it. I'd been invited to sign it. That's the difference my family never understood about me. They saw a 31-year-old woman who worked with numbers for a living and assumed that meant I was useful. They didn't understand that working with numbers for a living meant I never signed anything I hadn't read 3 times. I set my bag down slowly. My brother was leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed, doing that thing he does, where he tries to look casual but his jaw is tight enough to crack a walnut. My mother was sitting at the head of the table, her house, her rules, as she'd reminded me approximately 10,000 times over the course of my life. And my father was standing by the window with his back to me, which was how he handled every difficult conversation he'd ever had, by not having it. "Sit down, sweetheart," my mother said. I sat down. I pulled the contract toward me. She put her hand on top of it. "We just need your signature on the highlighted line," she said. "It's a formality." I looked at her hand. Then I looked at her face. Then I said, "I'd like to read it first." My brother made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course you would. I should explain what I do for a living, because it matters. I'm a forensic accountant. I work for a firm that gets called in when something doesn't add up. Embezzlement cases, fraud investigations, estate disputes. My job is to sit with a pile of financial documents that someone has deliberately made confusing and make them unconfusing. I find the thing that was hidden. I follow the money backward until I find where it started and where it went. I am very good at my job. I am also, apparently, the only person in my family who considers this a relevant skill set when someone slides an unsigned contract across the kitchen table and says the word formality. The contract was 12 pages. I read every one. By page 4, I understood what they were asking me to do. By page 8, I understood why they hadn't told me in advance. By page 12, I had stopped feeling like a daughter and started feeling like a forensic accountant. Here's what the contract said, stripped of the legal language. My brother had borrowed $280,000. He'd borrowed it 18 months ago from a private lending group. The kind that charges rates a bank would never touch and enforces repayment in ways a bank legally cannot. He'd used the money to fund a business venture that had not, by any stretch of the imagination, ventured anywhere. The business was gone. The $280,000 was gone. And the lending group was not gone. They were, in fact, quite present, and they wanted their money back with interest that had turned $280,000 into something closer to $310,000. My brother did not have $310,000. What my brother did have was a family. Specifically, a family with one member who had, 14 months ago, received a settlement from a car accident that had broken her collarbone in 2 places and kept her out of work for 3 months. The settlement had been $220,000. I had put every dollar of it into a high-yield account and not touched it because I understood compound interest and because I had plans. My parents had told my brother about the settlement. The contract on the table was a personal loan agreement. The terms stated that I would lend my brother $310,000. Not $220,000, not what I actually had, but $310,000, which was more than I possessed, at 0% interest, repayable when circumstances allow. When circumstances allow is not a repayment schedule. I know this because I have written actual repayment schedules. When circumstances allow is what you write when you don't intend to repay something. I set the contract down. I folded my hands on top of it. "Where does the additional $90,000 come from?" I asked. My mother blinked. "What?" "The contract is for $310,000. My settlement was $220,000. Where does the additional $90,000 come from?" Silence. My father turned slightly from the window, not fully, just enough to indicate he was aware a conversation was happening. "We thought," my mother said carefully, "that you might have some savings as well. You thought I might have savings. You've been working for 8 years, honey. You don't have any expenses. You live." "I own a condo," I said. "I have a mortgage. I have a car payment. I have a retirement account and an emergency fund and a brokerage account. None of those are liquid, and none of them are yours." My brother pushed off the counter. "Nobody's saying they're ours. We're asking you to help your family. You're asking me to give your lenders $310,000 by Tuesday." The room went quiet in a specific way, the way that means someone has said the true thing and everyone is upset about it. "How did you know the deadline was Tuesday?" my mother asked. I hadn't known. I'd guessed, based on the escalation language in paragraph 9. But I didn't say that. "I'd like to take this home and review it with my attorney," I said. My brother's face changed. You don't need an attorney. This is a family matter. Everything that requires a signature requires an attorney. That's not a personal opinion, that's just how contracts work. We don't have time for. How much time do we have? I asked. Another silence, this one longer. 4 days, my father said from the window. His first words of the evening. 4 days. He'd been standing there this whole time saving those up. I nodded. I picked up my copy of the contract, the one they'd already printed for me, which told me they'd been very confident I would sign, and I put it in my bag. I'll be in touch, I said. I was almost to the door when my mother said, Veronica. I stopped. If you don't help us, she said, we're going to lose this house. I looked at her. She was sitting very straight, the way she did when she wanted to look composed and actually looked desperate. I had known this woman for 31 years. I knew every version of her face. I'll be in touch, I said again. And I left. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the contract, a yellow legal pad, and a pot of coffee, and I worked. Not because I was panicking, panic is a budget I can't afford, but because I had 4 days and I intended to use all of them. The first thing I did was pull my own financial records. I needed to know exactly what I had, what was accessible, and what the tax implications would be of moving any of it. I also needed to know what my brother actually owed, which meant the contract alone wasn't enough. I needed to see the original loan document. I didn't have those, but I knew how to get them. The lending group was listed in the contract as Meridian Capital Solutions. I ran that name through 3 different databases before I went to bed. What I found was not reassuring. Meridian Capital Solutions had been involved in 2 social suits in the past 5 years. Both settled, both sealed. They had an LLC registered in Delaware and a phone number that went to a voicemail box that had never been set up. This was not a bank. This was not even a reputable private lender. This was the kind of arrangement that didn't go through courts when it wanted its money back. My brother had borrowed $280,000 from people who did not go through courts. I made a note on my legal pad. Who else knows about this? I called my mother the next morning, not to negotiate, to gather information. There's a difference, and the difference is who's asking the questions. How long have you known about this? I asked. About 6 months, she said. He told us when it started getting serious, and you didn't tell me. We were hoping to handle it ourselves. How? A pause. We took out a second mortgage. I closed my eyes. How much? 80,000. I wrote that down. That's where the extra 90 comes from. 80 from the second mortgage plus interest? Yes, so the house is already compromised. Veronica, I'm not angry, I said. I'm building a picture. Is there anything else? There was a long pause, long enough that I knew there was something else. Your father's retirement account, she said finally. He took a hardship withdrawal, 40,000. In February, I added that to my legal pad. Second mortgage, $80,000. Retirement withdrawal, $40,000. Total already liquidated by my parents to cover my brother's debt, $120,000. And they still needed $310,000 more from me. What does he have left? I asked. In retirement, about $60,000. My father was 63 years old with $60,000 in retirement savings. I did not say what I was thinking. I said, I'll call you tomorrow. I want to be clear about something. I love my family. I know that sounds hollow after everything I've just described, but it's true in the complicated way that love is always true when it coexists with damage. I loved my mother, who worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood and never once complained about it. I loved my father, who coached my soccer team every Saturday for 6 years, even though he clearly found the sport baffling. I even loved my brother, the version of him that existed before he decided the rules of money didn't apply to him the way they applied to everyone else. But love is not a contract, and love does not require me to destroy my financial future to paper over choices I didn't make. I had built everything I had from nothing. My settlement money wasn't a windfall. It was compensation for 3 months of physical therapy, for the bone that healed slightly wrong and still aches when it rains, for the 6 weeks I spent sleeping in a recliner because I couldn't lie flat. I had earned that money in the worst way possible. I was not going to hand it to Meridian Capital Solutions because my brother thought business venture was a personality trait. But here's the thing about being a forensic accountant. I don't just find problems. I find solutions. Specifically, I find solutions that are airtight, documented, and not easily unwound later by someone who changes their mind about what they agreed to. I had 4 days. I had a legal pad full of notes, and I had an idea. I called my attorney on day 2. Her name is not important, but her hourly rate is, because it was the best money I spent that week. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was a good attorney. What are you trying to accomplish? She asked when I finished. Two things, I said. First, I want to help my parents. Not my brother. My parents. Whatever I do, I want my parents to have a stable place to live. Second, I want any money I put into this situation to be legally protected so that it cannot disappear the way the last $280,000 disappeared. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me more about the house." Here is what I learned. Over the next 48 hours, my parents' house was worth approximately $410,000. It had a primary mortgage with a balance of about $95,000. My parents had added an $80,000 second mortgage in February. So the total debt against the house was $175,000 against a $410,000 asset. That meant there was roughly $235,000 in equity sitting in that house. More than enough to cover the debt. My attorney and I designed an arrangement. I would not write a check to Meridian Capital Solutions. I would not give my brother money that would evaporate into a debt and leave me with nothing but a piece of paper that said "when circumstances allow." Instead, I would pay off my parents' debts, both mortgages, in full. In exchange, my parents would sign the house over to me via a properly structured deed transfer, with a recorded lien that protected my investment. They could continue living there as long as they needed. I would charge nominal rent, $1 a year, the kind of thing that exists purely for legal validity. If and when they chose to sell, I would receive my investment back first, and any remaining equity would go to them. My brother's debt to Meridian was his problem, not mine. Not my parents, his. He had created it, he had concealed it, and he had brought in dangerous lenders without telling anyone. If he wanted to negotiate with Meridian, that was between him and Meridian. What's to stop them from going after your parents anyway? My attorney asked. If your brother can't pay, because my brother is going to pay, I said. With the thing he has left. She raised an eyebrow. His car, I said. A 2022 truck he bought 8 months ago, paid cash. I found the title filing. It's worth about $47,000 at market. That doesn't cover $310,000. No, I said. But I'm also going to have a conversation with Meridian. I called Meridian Capital Solutions on day 3. Someone picked up on the second ring, which meant the voicemail box being unset up was a choice, not an oversight. I identified myself as a forensic accountant and the sister of their borrower. I did not identify myself as someone who was going to pay the debt. I identified myself as someone who had spent 48 hours pulling public records on their lending operation. I told them calmly and specifically what I had found: the 2 civil suits, the Delaware LLC with no physical address, the interest rate in my brother's contract, which exceeded the usury limits of our state by approximately 14%. I'm not recording this call, I said. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you that the debt as structured is legally unenforceable in this state because of the rate, and that if you pursue collection through any means that involves my parents' property or my parents' physical safety, I will refer the full documentation to the State Attorney General's office and the CFPB. Silence on the line. What I'm offering instead, I said, is a voluntary settlement. My brother will transfer his truck, market value approximately $47,000, as partial payment. I will make a personal contribution of $30,000 as full and final settlement of the remaining balance, contingent on a signed release of all claims against all family members, notarized, returned to my attorney within 48 hours. More silence. You're getting $77,000 on a loan that was unenforceable to begin with, I said. Or you're getting a referral to the AG's office. I'm comfortable with either outcome. They called back in 2 hours. They took the settlement. I want to tell you about the day I sat down with my parents to explain what I'd done. My mother cried, which I expected. My father sat very still in his chair by the window, his chair, always his chair, and didn't say anything for a long time. My brother was not there. I had not invited him, and when he found out about the meeting later and called me, I let it go to voicemail. You own the house, my mother said finally. Not angry, just understanding it. You live in the house, I said. That doesn't change. You don't pay rent, you don't move. Nothing about your day-to-day life changes, but yes, the title is in my name with a recorded lien that documents my investment. It's a legal protection, for me and for you. For us, my father asked. If anyone comes after this property, I said, it's owned by someone other than you that protects you. He nodded slowly. He looked out the window, the way he did. Then he said, you didn't have to do this the way you did it. I know. You could have just said no. I know that too. He looked at me for a long moment. Why didn't you? I thought about that. About my mother working 2 jobs, about soccer Saturdays, about the bone in my shoulder that aches when it rains. Because saying no would have protected me, I said. What I did protected all of us. There's a difference. He nodded again. My mother was still crying quietly, the kind of crying that's more relief than grief. I sat with them for another hour. We had coffee. Nobody said anything important. It was the most peaceful evening I'd spent in that house in years. My brother called 7 times over the next 2 weeks. I answered on the 8th call. He was not great, he was not apologetic. He was furious about the truck, about the settlement, about the fact that I had handled something he felt was his to handle. You had no right to go to them, he said. You mean the people you borrowed $280,000 from without telling anyone? You humiliated me. I negotiated a settlement that cost me $30,000 and saved this family approximately $280,000 in exposure. You're welcome. He called me several things after that. I let him. When he was finished, I said, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this for you. I did it for Mom and Dad. My relationship with them is separate from my relationship with you, and what happens between you and me going forward is entirely dependent on what you do next. If you take accountability for what you put this family through, we can find a way forward. If you don't, we won't. That's the only thing I want to say. I hung up. He didn't call back. That was 11 months ago. My parents still live in the house. My mother has started a small catering business out of the kitchen, something she'd talked about for years and never done. My father is back to contributing to his retirement account. Slowly, but consistently, the second mortgage is paid off. The first is gone. There are no liens on the property except mine, and mine is the friendly kind. My brother is doing what my brother does, somewhere between a new idea and the consequences of the last one. I wish him well in the abstract, distant way you wish well to someone you've stopped waiting for. The $30,000 I put into the Meridian settlement hurt. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I had plans for that money. Those plans got pushed back about 14 months. But here's what I know, as someone who has spent her career following money to find where it went. Money is a resource. It replenishes. Time doesn't, and safety doesn't. And the particular piece of knowing your parents are sleeping in a house that no one can take from them. That doesn't either. My settlement was paid to me because I was broken. I used it to fix something else. I think that's the only revenge that ever actually works. Not the kind where you watch someone lose, the kind where you build something they can't touch, and you live in it.